Everybody deserves the opportunity to learn, grow, and in some cases, level up. This is the third part of secondary mutations. Jean Grey exists in a kind of gray area here. There's only so many secondary mutations out there, please be kind. Jean Grey has the Phoenix, but this ain't about them. This is about the time she lost her powers and then got them back. Miss Grey absorbed Psylocke's telepathy and lost her telekinesis, but not for long, she just got it back. And there wasn't an explanation, so Beast just made the connection that it must have been her secondary mutation, and he would know. Amanda gets into Beast's secondary mutation in part 1, go check it out if you haven't yet. Back to Jean. But what does the mutation that she gets mean for her and even other mutants? It potentially means she can restore her powers and come back from anything, and maybe even repower depowered X-Men. Of course, that's really up for debate, so let me know what you think down below. Cyberine, unfortunately not a ship name for Cyclops and Wolverine, instead it's the name of the Wolverine version that killed Cyclops. Do I see an enemies to lovers plotline in the future? Wouldn't that be wild considering the whole Jean Grey thing? That is so not important. Anyway, so on Earth 517, that's the Marvel Contest of Champions Earth, Wolverine kills Cyclops. Hurting a friend to that extent is traumatic, and the psychological aftermath of it all caused Wolverine to experience a secondary mutation. This mutation allegedly was mimicking Cyclops' powers. So now we have a Wolverine with all his regular bells and whistles that also basically has laser eyes. New fear unlocked. Richard Gill of Earth 616 is better known as Wildside. He was a founding member of MLF, the Mutant Liberation Front. They are not good, guys. His original mutation was hallucinations. He did this likely through telepathy, and he was pretty good at it. Unfortunately for him, he was depowered after M-Day. But hey, he survived, and that counts for something. He did eventually get his special talent back through the Mother Vine thing, plus a couple bonuses that made him an even bigger problem than before. They made his powers the same, but better. Instead of just hallucinations in the head, they were also kind of physical. As long as Wildside is conscious to keep it running, you're basically in a fever dream that feels super real and you can feel pain in. But if you knock him out, you're good. Black King, not to be confused with Black Tom from part 1, Black King is a billionaire, genius, energy absorption secondary mutanist. He develops a secondary mutation. That's the point. Sebastian Shaw's original special skill is the energy absorption thing. He can use the absorbed kinetic energy to make himself stronger, faster, and just basically enhance himself. This makes him hard to beat. Many heroes are known for their ability to pack a punch, so what do when the better the punch you give, the better the enemy gets? Mental stuff! The secondary mutation comes when Sebastian underwent the Mother Vine enhancement process. The bonus he gets is that now he doesn't even need to get punched to absorb the kinetic energy. He can just absorb what's around him. Good for him, bad for everybody else. He also develops concussion blasts. The energy he absorbs can be like thrown at somebody.
Synch developed a pretty powerful secondary mutation after he returned from the dead during the Krakoan era, so this is a recent one, so you might not know if you're not following with modern comics, or maybe you are and you're like, oh my gosh, this is the one I do know. His secondary mutation is more suspected, I would say, than confirmed. Well, we know he has this ability now, but we don't necessarily know if it is a secondary mutation or not. The ability in question is that he can now remain synced with other mutants even without being near them. I believe the idea is if he's synced with you once, he can kind of sync with you whenever, but of course there are some limits to this and we're still kind of figuring out how that works. I don't think that Synch using those powers if you're not near him would be as powerful. However, this mutation also takes a toll on his body and it seems to age him faster every time he uses it. In addition to this, he can also sync with superpowered non-mutants as well, which is huge. As I said, the full extent of his newfound abilities has not been explored, and I don't know if everyone would consider them to be a secondary mutation, as they're still tied to the same power set, but I personally do. I believe secondary mutations can also manifest in a boost to a predetermined power set, and I think this should count. To me, it's a secondary mutation, so there you go. Take it or leave it. Cipher is another hero who went from being kinda lame to kind of insanely powerful thanks to his own secondary mutation. Honestly, I've become a pretty big Doug fan in recent years, now that I better understand just how powerful his power set can be. I think my love of Doug comes from me also realizing just as a person how important communication is in my everyday life, and how much I value being around other people who can communicate well, and also value my ability to communicate with them. When we can't understand each other, it actually creates big problems in our lives, and that's what I appreciate about Doug and his power set. His ability to communicate, and through that resolve so many issues without even needing to come to blows. In terms of his mutation, we saw him go from a character who could just understand all languages and communicate with people in that way, to someone who really understood the various minute types of languages around us that often go unnoticed, and thereby become a master of those types of languages as well. Things like technology, and even at one point physically fighting, which is a sort of physical communication or language and dance. This shift in his abilities happened after Doug died and was resurrected, and it honestly puts him on a whole other level, and really he's pretty powerful. I know sometimes we say, oh, communicating, is that powerful? Actually it is. I always forget about Kid Omega's secondary mutation because it just very rarely comes up in the comics anymore. Probably because Quentin Quire no longer finds it interesting. At least that's the canon reason that we were given for this. Though I personally think it sounds super interesting, and I am surprised that he is bored of it. However, this is Quentin, so maybe I shouldn't be so surprised. He is often unimpressed by some of the coolest stuff, or at least he presents himself this way often. Kid Omega's secondary mutation here is a non-corporeal form, which when accessed also speeds up his consciousness and allows him as a telepath to reach out and connect with all sentient beings. He can think at the speed of light while in this form, but then again, even when Quire isn't in it, he is known for being one of the fastest thinkers and one of the smartest psionics on the planet. Maybe that's why he was like, it's alright. I become like whatever, I don't have a physical form, but like, I'm pretty cool even when I have a physical form. Said to be the daughter of Unis the Untouchable, one of the earliest X-Men villains, Carmella's mutant power set is similar to her father's. However, at one point her powers evolved even beyond her own control. This seems to be a result of being exposed to Mother Vine, which triggered a secondary mutation in her. This mutation would cause her energy field to overcharge the more she used it, making it more devastating in terms of the damage it did to the people and technology around her. And if you aren't familiar with Unis the Untouchable, his main thing was that you couldn't touch him because he had a field around him that made it impossible to touch him. But this is also a field that blasts out in Carmella's case as well. What was worse, she had no control really over the power of her energy field, and she also suffered as a result thanks to overcharge resulting in a backlash. So when it happened, she would also be in pain as well. So she'd be causing pain to others and then also be like, ow. I mean, I know she's like a villain normally, but still, sucks, you know? That would suck, whether you're a villain or not. Something about people being in near-death experiences that seemingly allows them to evolve out of survival. Masque is another one of those mutants, and Masque was inherently more of a villain in the comics, and also a Morlock. However, being a Morlock wasn't what made him evil, because Morlocks are not inherently evil. What made him evil was his outlook on life. His mutant powers allowed him to alter the appearance of others, basically turning him into one of the world's most powerful plastic surgeons. But at the same time, Masque was considered himself to be hideous, hence why he hid in the underground tunnels of New York with the Morlocks and usually led them. And his powers did not work on his own physical appearance. That is, until he was killed by Shatterstar. To survive, he had to move his organs around, and this actually unlocked the power within him to manipulate his own appearance. For a while, he actually used his powers to appear as Marilyn Monroe, no I'm not kidding, while leading the Morlocks. Although now Masque has seemingly gotten over his obsession with beauty and chooses to mostly appear just as he is. A friendly reminder to love yourself, friends. Take a page out of Masque's book. Actually, at least I think that's what happened to him. I don't know, I haven't read every single Masque issue, so. But if there isn't a Masque issue where he realizes, you know what, maybe I should love myself as I am, there should be one. And if there isn't, Marvel, if you need someone to write it, I'll write it for you.
In its resistance to telepathy. Psychics in the Marvel Universe are undeniably real, with a significant number of mutants possessing psychic abilities, including members of the X-Men. Professor X, the X-Men founder, is a powerful psychic, and Jean Grey initially displayed telekinesis before unlocking her own psychic powers. Rachel Grey, Jean Grey's daughter from an alternate universe, is also a psychic and frequently joins the X-Men, but despite the prevalence of psychics, some heroes in the universe receive training to defend themselves against psychic attacks and probing, such as Wolverine, who was given psionic shields by Charles Xavier to enhance his resistance. While these defenses are not foolproof, they offer valuable protection, especially especially when there are so many damn psychics. Notably, even some villains have safeguards against psychics, like Magneto and Juggernaut, who has that helmet that prevents Professor X from accessing their thoughts. But in a bizarre turn of events, Red Skull consumed Professor X's brain, gaining psychic abilities himself. So there you go, Wolverine, you'll be able to fight against Red Skull a little bit more, I guess. Is that really a common problem for you? I don't think so. In at 9, lie detection. Logan, or Wolverine, whatever you want to call him, possesses a heightened sense of smell and hearing that surpasses that of an average human. His sense of smell is incredibly potent, which allows him to detect scents from a considerable distance, making it useful for tracking down enemies, but this acute sense of smell enables him to actually pick up on certain emotions as well, such as fear, which is emanating from individuals, pheromones, all that jazz. Okay? His hearing is also quite exceptional, allowing him to perceive sounds that are far away and even detect softer noises that are typically beyond the range of normal perception. So, combining these powers, Wolverine actually becomes basically a human lie detector. By focusing on a specific person, he can determine if they are telling the truth or not by relying on his sense of smell, detecting changes in their scent and sweating patterns if they lie, while using his hearing to actually concentrate on their heartbeat and detect any shifts in their tone of voice, which is pretty dope, and I wish I had that in my last relationship. In at 8, Berserker Rage. Here I am just dumping my trauma. Wolverine possesses a dangerous state known as Berserker Rage, which is triggered by an overwhelming anger that drives him to lash out uncontrollably. In this frenzied state, he becomes an unstoppable killing machine, slashing through enemies without hesitation. However, the downside is that Wolverine loses all sense of control and may even harm his allies, unable to recognize them in the midst of his rage, which I certainly relate to. This internal struggle has plagued Logan since childhood and often leads him to distance himself from others, fearing what he might do, but despite the risks, there are moments when the Berserker Rage proves necessary, particularly in his relentless battles against Sabretooth. The movie franchise also showcases this aspect of Wolverine, with a memorable scene in X2, the best X-Men movie, where he unleashes this fury, slashing through adversaries within the confines of the X-Mansion. But again, you all remember that scene, it's the best X-Men movie. Please flash sarcasm on the screen because they won't know I'm joking. In its 7, Night Vision. The combination of Wolverine's claws and super healing already gives him a formidable set of powers. Okay, the healing factor alone ensures that any wound is swiftly healed, including those caused by his claws, making him truly lethal. And alongside these regenerative capabilities that literally brought him back from a drop of blood, Logan possesses heightened senses like the super hearing, the smelling, and the ability to see in the dark. Although this power is often overlooked by some comic writers, it provides him with a distinct advantage in various situations. Wolverine has had an array of powers that has changed and evolved over the years, making him increasingly more powerful, but what initially began as a mutant with enhanced durability and claws developed into a character that is basically a, dare I say, Wolverine. Haha, get it? Yeah. He's constantly aware of his surroundings no matter what environment he's in because of this night vision, and his tendency to eliminate enemies before they actually pose like a genuine threat makes him exceedingly more formidable than normal. And this explains how he's able to do that, because you know, he can see in the dark. And it's 6, Swordsman. In the 1990s comic storyline Fatal Attraction, Magneto forcibly removes the adamantium from Wolverine's body, leaving him without his signature claws. In this adamantiumless period, Wolverine carried a katana given to him by the Yoshida clan for added protection. One notable use of this katana was when he ended up beheading Bloodscream. Yeah. Oh boy. Later on, Wolverine acquired the Muramasa Blade, a sword with mythical properties capable of neutralizing a mutant's healing abilities, which is the unique blade that became his weapon of choice in certain situations, allowing him to confront and defeat formidable adversaries such as Omega Red and Sabretooth. And as it was the only weapon capable of truly ending Wolverine, therefore also able to end Omega Red and Sabretooth. But yeah, he's skilled with a sword, which you wouldn't really expect because, you know, he has the claws, but also makes sense because the claws are just basically tiny swords.
There's something about people being in near-death experiences that seemingly allow them to evolve in some way and survive. Masque is another one of the mutants that has experienced that. Masque was inherently more of a villain in the comics and also a Morlock. However, being a Morlock wasn't what made him evil. What made him evil was kind of his outlook on life. His mutant powers allowed him to alter the appearance of others, basically turning him into one of the world's most powerful plastic surgeons of all time. But at the same time, Masque was considered himself to be hideous. Hence why he hid in the underground tunnels of New York with the Morlocks and, was a Morlock, because that's kind of their whole thing. And his powers did not work on his own physical appearance, tragically. That is until he was nearly killed by Shatterstar. Now, to survive, he had to actually move his organs around, so this gave him the power to manipulate his appearance. He leveled up. He gained what we would call a secondary mutation. For a while, he also used his powers to appear as Marilyn Monroe while leading the Morlocks. Although now Masque has seemingly gotten over his obsession with beauty and usually chooses to just appear as he is. Either that or people forgot that this power existed, but I'm gonna go with the route of, Masque just loves himself now, because I like that story for him. Moira was usually known as more of an ally to the X-Men for many years, and none of us would have ever suspected that she had powers at all. She has been known as a mutant ally throughout many comics, often Charles Xavier's ill-fated lover, and if you don't see her as being a major player in the comics, let me just remind you that she was the one who figured out how to cure the legacy virus, and I honestly think that elevated her even to a superhero status if we're talking about it. We found out Moira McTaggart was a mutant recently in modern comics during the House of X series. We learned that she had done more than just die in the comics. We learned that her powers allowed her to actually be reborn, but not in a traditional sense of superpowers. This isn't a healing factor or a resurrection. Her powers actually allow her to relive her life again. Yeah, so it's kind of like a reincarnation. From birth to death, starting in the womb. So she's living the same years, but she can use her actions to alter history, making her an odd but surprisingly powerful mutant. But not everyone knows about Moira McTaggart and her powers, so there you go. This is less of a power, this next one, and more of just a really interesting fact about a power, but I didn't know this myself initially and I was surprised by it somewhat, so I figured I would just share it with you and count it as a point on this list. Now, we all know that Jean is one of the preferred hosts, if not, I would say, the preferred host for the Phoenix Force, but did you know that the all-powerful cosmic entity was actually holding Jean back? Yeah, apparently that's right. Jean has stated before that she actually became aware after the Phoenix Force left her that it was actually causing her to hold back her abilities for fear of the Phoenix taking a hold of her and possessing her. So while many like to say that Jean has only ever been extremely powerful when she's merged with the Phoenix, like that's Jean at her most powerful, it turns out that it's probably just the opposite, because she literally fought to hold herself back, which honestly to me makes some sense. Saying Jean isn't actually powerful and that it's like all the Phoenix has always just felt like kind of a cop-out to me, considering that it's her own power and empathy that the Phoenix was seemingly attracted to in the first place. Like that's why she's the ideal host, so to me that makes sense. But that also means some crazy stuff. That means like Jean could destroy maybe the multiverse herself, you know what I mean? Because Phoenix can destroy planets, so I always forget about Kid Omega's secondary mutation because it very rarely comes up in the comics, and I feel like it's also therefore a power that a lot of people are gonna forget. Now, I usually probably forget about it because Quentin Quire no longer really finds it interesting. At least, that's the canon reason that we're given for why we really never see it anymore. I personally think it sounds super interesting, and I'm surprised that he's bored of it. However, this is Quentin, so maybe I shouldn't be so surprised. Quentin Quire is a bit of an oddball. He's often unimpressed as well by some of the coolest stuff. He's very like, ugh, whatever, I'm over it. Or at least, he presents himself this way often. Kid Omega's power that I'm about to talk about here is that he has a non-corporeal form, which when accessed also speeds up his consciousness and actually allows him as a telepath to reach out and connect with all sentient beings. Yeah, basically like all of Earth he could just connect with. He can think at the speed of light while in this form, but then again, even when Quire isn't in it, he's known for being one of the fastest thinkers and one of the smartest psionics on the planet, so I think we kept that part, but we forgot about the non-corporeal stuff.
Mutants are already gifted with amazing abilities that put them a cut above regular old humans like you and me. But then there are those mutants who get not one, but 2 mutations, giving them even more and more power, as if they needed it. The Blob, or Frederick Dukes, is one of those characters. Now I really didn't give the Blob enough credit when I was growing up, and he can actually do some pretty cool things, and some things that didn't even occur to me. His actual main mutant ability, for example, is that he can essentially become immovable by creating a monodirectional increase of gravity beneath him that extends about 5 feet in radius from his center of balance. But what's even cooler is that, with some training, Blob was able to manipulate his gravitational aura outwards in order to trigger a localized implosion. Also, the Blob is incredibly durable. The fat on the Blob is able to absorb the impact of rifle bullets, cannonballs, bazookas, and even torpedoes. He has been able to survive being hit by a meteorite that was 50 feet in diameter moving at terminal velocity, but that's not all. Blob is also able to manipulate his body, basically shapeshifting to a degree. After undergoing the Mother Vine enhancement process, Blob developed a secondary mutation, liquid form. Now not actually, but his secondary mutation allowed him to stretch his body to a great extent, and the problem is the mutation was hard to control, so when he first ever manifested it, he stretched himself too far and basically turned into a puddle. Next up is Gambit, and Gambit has the really cool mutant ability of molecular acceleration, allowing him to convert the potential energy of a non-living object through touch and kinetically excite the molecules to the point that they explode. Usually when a mutant has an ability that manipulates molecules, they have a pretty vast array of powers, but for Gambit, he mainly just uses his abilities as attacks, charging up his signature playing cards and bow staff and other objects like that. We have seen him reach the full potential of his power, only this was an alternate reality version of the guy. He could manipulate kinetic energy down to a molecular level, which basically made him a god. But as you may have guessed, Gambit has a second mutation. After a traumatic event left him blind, a secondary mutation kicked in that allowed Gambit to be clairvoyant. Gambit's ability did not give him the power to consciously look into the future. Instead, his secondary mutation acted like a warning system, kinda like the spider sense. He could sense danger and react to it. Now, fortunately for him, Gambit got his sight back not long after losing it, meaning he stopped needing to rely on this secondary mutation, but he does still totally have it. Daken, or as he's going by now, Akihiro, possesses a lot of the same abilities as his father Wolverine. He has a crazy healing factor, superhuman senses, and of course, bone claws. But what some people may not be aware of is the one mutation he possesses that neither his father nor his sister / clone possesses. That power would be pheromone control. Daken has empathic ferrokinetic abilities that allow him to use his pheromones to manipulate the emotional state and sensory perception of others. He has used this ability to instill intense fear, happiness, depression, fascination, and a false sense of security in others. The false sense of security one is probably the most interesting, as it's allowed him to sneak up on others without them even worrying that he could be there. He also has used this ability to alter others' depth perception and vision, making them fight sluggishly. He can also control his own pheromones to make him basically untrackable, even to someone like Wolverine. There are limits to Daken's pherokinesis, but it's such a cool ability. If you have seen the movie Logan, then you'll recognize Caliban as the blind, seemingly albino mutant who hangs out with Logan and Professor X. In that movie, he displays Caliban's main ability, which is being able to detect mutants' X genes, usually within a 25-mile radius. Although, it's worth noting he has been able to detect particularly powerful mutants from further away before. But what I want to talk about is Caliban's other power that most people don't know. This is called his flight or fight response. Whenever Caliban feels stressed, he manifests 2 extra powers: super strength that can overpower Spider-Woman, and fear absorption. This second power allowed Caliban to absorb the psionic energy created in the fear from others and amplify it back into his environment, doing things like very quickly turning those nearby into a fear-induced panicked mob.
Number 5. Overcoming mental blocks. This is most likely a case of writers just forgetting the focus of Jean's psionic powers in the earlier days, but it happened in continuity, so that also means we can kind of count their possible mistake as actually a major strength for Jean. And if another writer wanted to reflect back on this moment, they could easily use it to bolster Jean's power levels, even back in the day when she was notably written to be a lot weaker. Remember how I said that Professor X created mental blocks for Jean when it came to her telepathy, which he later removed when he felt she was ready to handle her own off-the-charts power levels? Well, apparently early on, Jean did still display some some telepathic abilities, even somehow with those blocks supposedly in place. She read Professor X's mind in an issue of Captain America, sensing that something was wrong by reading his thoughts. She literally says like she read his mind basically. If this is true and it's considered canon, it would mean that Jean temporarily pushed through Xavier's mental blocks to read his mind, which, gotta be honest, that's like on a whole other level of power, I think. So if we want to count it as canon, there you go. Number 4, interstellar travel. When it comes to those with psionic abilities, we don't typically think of them as cosmic heroes who can fly through space and fight aliens, but guess what? Jean can. While bonded with the Phoenix Force, Jean has been shown to be capable of interstellar travel, propelling herself through space. The vacuum of space, she can just fly right through it and she feels fine, doesn't even need a spacesuit. She has also been shown to be able to fly and make it appear as though others are flying on Earth by using her telekinesis, but that one you probably already knew about. The interstellar travel though, that might have caught you unawares. Number 3, communicating undetected. Another great power as a telepath that Jean manages to have is keeping her telepathic conversations secret, which, when there's a lot of other telepaths around you, is not easy. Basically, there are many other powerful telepaths around you who could be trying to pry and eavesdrop on you, and a lot of them are also powerful. But Jean has managed to keep more than a few mental conversations a secret, even from some of the other most powerful telepaths in the universe, including Null, the god of symbiotes. While Null himself was in the middle of a telepathic conversation with Dylan, Jean actually managed to use her powers to slip into said conversation completely unnoticed, with Null not even aware that Jean was also talking to Dylan telepathically at the same time, and that Dylan wasn't really listening to him so much as he was listening to Jean. Honestly kinda rude, but also, yeah, Jean's trying to tell Dylan how to save the day, so fair enough. Number 2, control over nightmares. I don't know what's more frightening, the fact that Jean can basically manipulate people's dreams and nightmares through the villain Nightmare, or the threat she gave Nightmare after defeating him, where she basically said if she had to deal with him again, she was gonna destroy him at an atomic level. She's like, look, I don't like to end people's lives, but if you mess with me again, I will destroy you at an atomic level. Either way you slice it though, when it comes to nightmares that have been created by the god of nightmares himself, Nightmare, Jean is the one who would really call the shots between them when they're pitted against one another. I've seen them run into each other a few times, and it does not end well for Nightmare. Number 1, the Phoenix Force. This is less of a power and more of a really interesting fact about a power. So for those of you that heard me say that title and go, well obviously we know that, Amanda, yes, yeah, I know. But I actually didn't know this fact myself initially, and I was surprised by it somewhat, so I figured I'd share it with you. We all know that Jean is one of the preferred hosts, if not, I would say, the preferred host for the Phoenix Force. But did you know that the all-powerful cosmic entity was actually holding Jean back? That's right. Jean has stated before that she actually became aware after the Phoenix Force left her that it was causing her to hold back her abilities and her power for fear of the Phoenix taking hold over her, because then she wouldn't have control. So while many like to say that Jean has only ever been extremely powerful when she's merged with the Phoenix, it turns out it's probably just the opposite. So yeah, Jean destroying like a whole world, apparently that's Jean holding back. Which honestly, to me, I gotta say, that all kind of makes sense. Saying Jean isn't actually powerful and that it's all the Phoenix has always felt like a cop-out to me, considering it's her own power and her own empathy that the Phoenix was seemingly attracted to in the first place. So you would think that would mean that she's at least on the same power level as the Phoenix, if not more powerful, and that's why it was like, yeah, I want you as the host, cause you got the power. Everyone knows Emma Frost's diamond form, but did you know this wasn't the first ever secondary mutation to even appear in the comics? What? This secondary mutation is an interesting one for me, as I didn't know about it myself. I've never been deep in the know when it comes to Elixir, so it was cool to find out that something I thought was just a core part of his standard mutation is actually perhaps secondary. For this point, we're talking about Elixir's physical mutation, the golden hue of his skin. This change occurred shortly after his first appearance. Only a few issues later, he actually uses his powers to heal himself and his skin changes to a golden color. So it seems to make sense that I wouldn't know this was even a secondary mutation, since most of his appearances have been with this look. Joshua Foley, aka Elixir's skin, also changes color when he uses his powers to harm others, changing from a golden hue to a deep metallic black color. The changing of his skin is not something that Elixir also seems to be able to control, but instead is a mutation that is close closely tied to his primary healing and death touch abilities. If your skin changed color anytime you did anything, what would you definitely want it to be or not want it to be? While many heroes have secondary mutations, let's not forget that this whole idea in terms of when it was classified started with Emma Frost, who herself was once a famous villain. Likewise, there have been other villains who have also gained a secondary mutation, but who simply aren't as well known. Enter Black Tom Cassidy, a classic mutant villain, and if you aren't familiar with him, you should be. He's pretty cool. His secondary mutation has changed somewhat throughout his history. It's been described as giving him the upgraded ability to channel his bioblast through his fists, as opposed to needing wood to channel said blast, which is what he originally had, giving him his own plant form, and giving him the power to manipulate plants and wood around him. Like many others on our list, Black Tom actually got this sort of secondary mutation from being mortally wounded, but yeah, it's changed a lot throughout the years in terms of exactly how it works or what it does. It feels weird to include Beast also on this list, but when I think about most people I know who love the X-Men, they usually always think of Beast as being default blue. Now this is because most of the people I know grew up with the 90s or early 2000s Beast after he'd undergone his secondary mutation. Many fans out there still don't know that Beast's original power set was just that he was like super dexterous. He just looked like a guy. He had big feet, big hands, and he swung around a lot. Initially, Beast looked like this guy, but after being exposed to a serum he created which isolates and boosts the X gene in mutants, he became permanently mutated again, gaining the secondary mutation of the blue fur. In fact, I think Beast may be the first mutant in comics to have developed a secondary mutation, before we even had a terminology for it at that time. He mutated. He's all covered in blue fur, which initially was actually like a gray fur, but that's a whole other story. That has to do with comics coloring and miscommunications and just how blues and blacks got often mixed up by people. With this next one, we're not talking about that time that Kitty Pryde was turned into a cat person in Wundagore, although that was a thing that happened. It was something though that she was given as opposed to an evolution of her mutant-based abilities, and it was temporary. With Kitty, or Kate, it's interesting as there are a few different instances where I feel one could argue that she manifested some kind of secondary mutation, or more specifically evolution of her powers. But this has also, I don't believe, ever fully been confirmed in the comics. Let me know if I missed something and if there is a page where someone says, this is a secondary mutation. I'd like to focus on the heightening of her powers over the years, which I believe is the version of a secondary mutation, as I understand what secondary mutations are, which can either be a significant power boost or it can be something additional. Some people, however, see secondary mutations as just something new and concrete added to a mutant's power set, like Emma Frost's diamond form, which exists separate from her telepathy. But it doesn't need to be that. And in fact, I think a major power boost does count, hence why I'm counting it. And if you don't agree, we can debate about it in the comments. Like when Kitty stopped needing to hold her breath while intangible, or when she was merged with the Black Vortex, becoming all-powerful, but then after giving up the Black Vortex's power, discovered that she had unlocked a new level of power through that, so after using it, it was kind of like an additional mutation. As I said, there are actually multiple moments for Kitty when I feel like this has happened, but those are the main ones that come to my mind. Speaking of folks who have seen major power boosts throughout the years, enter Bobby Drake, aka Iceman. Iceman has had a few different moments like Kitty Pryde where I would say his powers have evolved, and which could be considered a secondary mutation as he severely leveled up. When he learned he could manipulate his body into more than just ice or snow and learned to use his water form. When he learned he could just become straight up ice. That was a whole thing, because before he was, I believe, covered in it. When he healed back up after having his ice form shattered. And when he learned he could make ice clones. Honestly, Bobby's just had a lot of moments because he's super OP.
Wolverine's kiddo on Earth 1610 is taking after his dear old dad. James Jimmy Hudson Jr. has got the it factor, healing factor, and claws. First comes all that, and then comes the indestructible skeleton. His secondary mutation is that his skeleton gets coated in an organic metal. Wolverine famously has the Atom skeleton after going through a brutal, rough procedure, but his son, he just comes with it built in. It's what lets the kid have metal claws just like his dad. The metal trick can also make a pretty sturdy mouthguard. Unfortunately, Jimmy never knew his dad. Jimmy was adopted early in life, like newborn early, by Wolverine's friend James Hudson. But Jimmy did know the X-Men. Kitty Pryde was one of the first to meet him. She brought some of Wolverine's stuff and a hologram of Wolverine explaining to Jimmy that he was his son. She encouraged him to try out his mutations for the first time. Sabretooth doesn't just hate Wolverine, apparently. He hates the whole family tree because Sabretooth attacked little Jimmy too. Well, he was a teen at the time, so he wasn't that little. Some parents pass down family rings and some enemies for life. If you are trying to find Jimmy online, you might see the alias Poison attached to it. Well, one horrible day, the Poison Hive invaded Earth 1610. One invaded Jimmy. Long story short, most of the poisons end up eliminated, but lucky for Jimmy, not the one in him. That one dubs itself just Poison and walks the earth in Jimmy's body. They are not on the same side at first, they are each fighting for control of the body, but eventually their physical form is threatened. They have to put aside their differences to survive and agree to work together to escape. Eventually they head off together to figure out how to co-inhabit one body, and all of this happened in the Ultimate Universe. Sharon Ginsburg is like the Elwoods and Batwoman of the Marvel Universe. Let me explain. She is a mutant, but her civilian job is being a lawyer. Lawyer by day, bat-winged mutant by night. Or whenever she needs her wings. She is made for flying, her bones are lighter, and she is smaller than the average person. Her wings are massive, like at least a 15-foot wingspan, but because this is Marvel and everything is possible, she can easily hide the wings. The wings are her whole identity in terms of mutanthood, so losing those wings, that's a lot of trauma and pain, and apparently the exact right amount to trigger a secondary mutation. Her secondary mutation brings in even more bat qualities. When her wings were roughly removed, she fell unconscious. Eventually waking up, she realized they were gone. She was so upset and angry, she manifested bat claws and she went insane. She was captured in X-Statix 11 and we haven't seen her since. I hope she's doing well. Thanks to a secondary mutation, Havok can wreak havoc forever. But first, Alex Summers' talents include energy absorption, even from something like a star. Because of that bit with the star, he is definitely immune to extreme heat and radiation too. He shoots plasma blasts, usually from his arms. They can be used as a weapon or to even help him fly. So that's pretty much everything he had going on before the secondary mutation. His secondary mutation appeared in the Mutant X storyline. Alternate reality versions of Alex Summers got yanked together by a cosmic force, and we don't really learn that anything serious mutation-wise has happened until Alex passes away, then doesn't. He wakes up in a different timeline in a different version of himself. Now, he has the ability to shift his consciousness from one version of himself to the next. Can he die? Maybe. Being a host for the Nexus of all realities is what caused this. You've heard of Mother Earth. Get ready for Nature Girl. She does go by a few names, and I was not prepared for one of them. Her civilian name is Lin Lee, but her other mutant name is Armageddon Girl. That's a 180 from Nature Girl. It is fitting though, because she did do a 180. She started out as a hero. She attended the School for Gifted Youngsters, named the Jean Grey School for Higher Learning at the time. It had been established that she could control or influence nature and animals. Make birds carry her, plants fight for her, that kind of stuff. She goes off the rails and joins the bad guys. Bad for everyone else, but good for her because she discovers her secondary mutation. She not only has a connection to all things in nature and can influence them, she can draw power from them to make herself more powerful. The power she is drawing though is basically the thing's life force, so she usually ends up killing whatever it is that she's drawing from. Right around one of the last times we saw her in the X-Men Unlimited Infinity comic is when she started going by the name Armageddon Girl. Pietro and Wanda are probably the most, maybe, famous mutants, it's a whole thing with them, of the Marvel Universe, but there's another set of definitely mutant power twins that deserve some attention too. Northstar and Aurora. They are a beacon of light, literally. When they were babies, they were separated after a car crash killed their parents. While separated, they both learned of their mutant abilities on their own throughout their teenage years. Both twins are very fast. Northstar used this to become an Olympic champion. They can both fly, but their big trick only appears when they are together, so sweet. When they physically touch, they can generate a powerful, bright light. It can blind or simply just distract enemies. The secondary mutation manifests after a series of experiments requested by Aurora so that the twins can do the whole light thing without touching. It works, and now they both have a semi-new talent. Angelic X-Men Warren Worthington III was just a guy until he got his wings. Then he was a mutant with the ability to shockingly fly. The wings have other uses too, they are really strong, so he can use them to fight. Angel, unfortunately, got mixed up with Apocalypse, and Apocalypse planted a death seed in Warren. Warren becomes Archangel on his way to being the next Apocalypse, which is a very bad thing. He doesn't get there though, good news. What he does get is healing blood. Kind of. Warren himself gets an accelerated healing factor, but if you were to get a blood transfusion from him, that blood is supercharged with the healing powers. We see this happen in Uncanny X-Men 420. I'll take a wild guess and say that he's got the universal blood type. He also got blue skin. He used to be just a guy. Look at him now.
You know the X-Men, sure. You know mutants, probably a lot of them, yeah. But do you know about all the mutations they have? Maybe not. Devil Dinosaur comes from the prehistoric past of Earth 78411. Most people think of him as just a devil beast from Dinosaur World, and yeah, he is that. But did you know that he is also a mutant? Yep, his mutant gene activated after a traumatic experience with fire. Fortunately, he was saved from those who would harm him by Moon Boy, who befriended the beast. Devil Dinosaur's skin changed to red as a result of his mutation, making him a giant bright red dinosaur. Really stands out. Which honestly kind of makes me think of Clifford the Big Red Dog. I wonder if Clifford is also secretly a mutant with a secret mutation. He has like bright red fur. So strange. Devil Dinosaur was partnered with Moon Boy for quite some time until Moon Boy's death, wherein a new character was introduced to work alongside Devil Dinosaur, a girl with inhuman genes known as Lunella Lafayette, or Moon Girl. We love Lunella. I love DD too. He's also a really great card in Marvel Snap, by the way, especially if you pair him with Moon Girl. It's one of my favorite combos, even to this day. I don't know what's more frightening, the fact that Jean can basically manipulate people's dreams and nightmares through the villain Nightmare, or the threat she gave Nightmare after defeating him in the comics, where she threatened to destroy him at an atomic level. Yikes. Either way you slice it though, when it comes to nightmares that have been created by the god of nightmares himself, Jean is actually the one who would really call the shots between them when they're pitted against one another. I know you'd think Nightmare would come out on top here, but Jean is just that powerful. She could not only use him to take control of others' dreams the world over, but of course could also just take control of those dreams from Nightmare himself, and even match him, or really even beat him in his own realm, which is pretty wild. Chamber is a weird character, but also a beloved character. Like many weirdos that I love to talk about, Chamber is of course also a mutant. His name is Jonathan Starsmore, and while he may actually have the potential to be considered Omega level, that doesn't make his powers any less weird, thank goodness. His power relates to the fact that he's actually made of pure psionic energy. Now while many people know that Jono is psionic, because you know he's always talking telepathically, I don't think many folks actually think about like why his powers manifesting caused him to lose his jaw. I mean, I'm sure the hardcore Jono fans know all about this, but for those of you that are a casual Chamber fan, I'm gonna get into it. When his powers first manifested, they blew a massive hole in his chest and his face. While many people would be immensely harmed or even killed by such an occurrence, Chamber was not. As a result, Jono no longer needs to breathe, eat, or drink, and his blood does not even course through his veins. It doesn't need to do that to keep him alive. Yeah, as such he is typically seen with a scarf or some other clothing covering the lower half of his face, and he communicates telepathically, as you know, he can no longer talk since he has no jaw. Also, he's made of psionic energy, so he's a very powerful psionic mutant. By far one of the strangest, yet kinda in a weird way most OP characters of all time from Marvel has to be Doop. Okay, so he's at the very least the most strange. And now we have his evil counterpart, Pood in Excellent, who might somehow be weirder. Oh boy. Doop is pretty powerful because he has some fourth wall shattering level of awareness, and he's able to actually move between panels in comics, existing not just within the panels of the page, but also moving into the borders and margins as well, able to exist outside of the panels that we're used to reading, which I think is pretty wild. I mean, not many other characters can do that, never mind mutants. Granted, we don't really know what Doop is, or you know, if he's really a mutant, but he definitely hangs out with the X-Men a lot, and I feel like he's so weird, I just would believe he is a mutant in some way in his origin. Though at this point in time, there's no definitive origin for the character yet, just to be fully transparent here. He's also demonstrated some powerful magical abilities too, as well as super strength, speed, durability, and even the power to resurrect. Without the help of the Five no less, he can just do that by himself, so he's got a lot of powers that I feel like not a lot of people think about. The Love Eyes is one of my favorites. Never forget Madeline Pryor's awesome telekinetic lasso. What an awesome and totally bizarre weapon for a Goblin Queen to wield. Maybe we can call it a telekinetic whip instead. That seems more fitting based on Maddie's kinda generally crazy and definitely vicious and vengeful disposition. Madeline Pryor as the Goblin Queen used this lasso to wrangle, get this, Jean Grey. That's right, her lasso was powerful enough to wrangle Jean, who herself is considered, now at least, an Omega level mutant in both psionic areas of power. What's more, Maddie's psionic whip was so powerful, it also basically just rendered Jean powerless when they were having their fight. So yeah, I feel like if you can use any kind of lasso to render Jean Grey powerless, that's impressive. Why doesn't she use it more often? She should bring it back. I want to see the lasso again. Let's bring it back. Training with Doctor Strange made magic even more powerful. She already has all the knowledge imparted to her by Alternate Storm and of course Belasco and all his magical texts, so adding in the teaching of Doctor Strange has made her an insane level of powerful when it comes to her magical abilities. At one point she used her knowledge to turn herself and a group of other supers, including mutants and some Guardians of the Galaxy members, invisible. Yeah. And a Gambit to buy time when her teleportation powers just couldn't cut it. It's not really like a mutant power, but it is a power that a mutant has. So, see what I did there?
Halfway through into number 5, Wisdom. Logan's journey as a superhero spans across significant historical events. Okay, he served in both World War I and World War II. He even fought alongside Captain America, and following these wars he found himself in Japan where he formed a family only to tragically lose them, and these devastating losses combined with centuries of heartbreak contribute to Logan's bitter and cynical demeanor. But after going through the adamantium bonding process, he befriended Alpha Fight, a Canadian superhero team, and became one of Canada's earliest superheroes. His initial task involved intervening in a conflict between Hulk and a Wendigo. However, his path took a turn when he was sent to eliminate Charles Xavier, but ended up being influenced by Xavier's telepathic abilities, leading him to join the X-Men. But still, okay, Wolverine's wealth of experiences and wisdom greatly influenced the X-Men's journey, and I mean, with an extended lifespan comes years to learn and become wiser, which he clearly has, and then it only continues on. So yeah, dude, damn, well done. Good for you. In at 4, Feral Form. The 90s marked a peculiar era in comic books characterized by excessive violence, extreme physical attributes, and objectification. But it was a time when unconventional ideas emerged, yielding both remarkable stories like Age of Apocalypse and disappointing ones like the Clone Saga. But surprisingly, Wolverine spent a significant portion of this decade without his adamantium skeleton. Despite losing the metal coating, he did retain his bone claws and healing factor, maintaining, the classic Wolverine sort of aspect. However, the supervillain Genesis sought to actually restore Wolverine's adamantium, driven by a desire to serve the powerful Apocalypse. In a failed attempt though, Logan's body rejected the procedure and triggered a dormant mutation. Stripped of adamantium, Wolverine underwent a primal transformation, adopting an animalistic mentality while his nails grew into natural claws. It showcased the profound impact that the absence of adamantium had on Wolverine's body, and he just kind of became a beast, ironically enough. So yeah, he kind of needs the adamantium nowadays, otherwise it kind of goes back. Getting close to the end in number 3, Super Dad. On Earth 982, Rena was the new girl at high school, where some of the more popular girls tried to make her life miserable, stating that she was the daughter of an immigrant and an unemployed biker and all that. But when her dad, Logan, picked her up from school on his bike, everyone's opinion changed, especially when they learned that her mother, Elektra, was a wealthy martial arts expert. Yeah, it's crazy what fear can do. However, life at high school wasn't just about dealing with the crowd and normal high school things, because it's a comic book high school. So as Wild Thing, Rena had to save a classmate from a high-speed kidnapper, defeat a computerized assassin, stop a demonic invader, and even fight one of her teachers when he was turned into a Prime Sentinel. But that's just high school. But the fact that he can just pull up to her school and then everyone stops making fun of his kid, that's a superpower, okay? And I wish my dad had that superpower. Although I probably wouldn't be as funny as I think I am if that had been the case. But ultimately, in number 2, time travel. When translating comic book superheroes to the big screen, screenwriters have to take creative liberties to adapt the material effectively, okay? What happens in comics can't necessarily work on screen. For example, Thanos' infatuation with Lady Death, which was a significant aspect of his character in the comics, comics was omitted for Infinity War and Endgame, allowing for a more focused portrayal of him. Similarly, the X-Men's colorful costumes were deemed impractical for the early films, leading to more black latex that ironically have aged poorly compared to their comic counterparts. But when the classic Days of Future Past storyline was adapted in the movie of the same name, significant alterations were made. In the comics, Kitty Pryde was the central character sent to the past to save the future, but in the movie, Wolverine took on that role. The film introduced the concept of Kitty Pryde's ability to send someone's consciousness back in time, with the caveat that it damages the mind. Due to his regenerative healing factor though, Wolverine became the only valid candidate to actually go through time that far back and ensure everyone's survival. And then finally, in at number 1, the Phoenix Force. I mean, like, okay, this is kind of a cop-out, but like, it still happened, okay? It was originally believed that the Phoenix Force was just simply an alternate personality of Jean Grey, or well, I guess the Phoenix was, just emerging when she acquired immense power. However, after Jean's tragic demise in the Dark Phoenix saga, it was retconned that the Phoenix was in fact a cosmic entity, and the Phoenix Force had a knack for possessing individuals, with Jean Grey being its favored host. Over the years though, it has possessed numerous mutants. Rachel Grey, Jean's daughter from an alternate future, Cyclops, Emma Frost, Colossus, Magic, and Namor were all possessed by the Phoenix Force at some point, and simultaneously, in fact, forming the group known as the Phoenix Five, because, you know, you couldn't have one more, otherwise they would be competing with the Sinister Six, and you couldn't have one less, otherwise it would be like the Fantastic Four. You know, there's a lot of numbers that you gotta work with. But yeah, Wolverine has also had it, okay? So there you go. He's had that, and he has all those powers, or at least he has. And you know what, if you want to get mad at me for including this, that's fine. It's just engagement. Comment on the video and tell me how much you hate my guts. Thanks for watching.
Number 10. Control over life and death. Obviously, as the Phoenix or even the Dark Phoenix, Jean has been shown to have this ability. But did you know that this power actually first manifested when Jean's powers did, really going on to showcase the potential of her future abilities. When Jean's best friend Annie died when she was little after being tragically hit by a car, the traumatic experience caused Jean's powers to manifest. She reached out and created a psychic link between her and her friend, and despite being very new to these abilities, Jean was actually able to hold her friend's mind there, keeping her alive and trying to protect her from the encroaching darkness. Unfortunately, she was not strong or skilled enough just yet to do so for more than a few moments, and ultimately could not bring her friend back to life as Annie's injuries were simply too great. Eventually, Annie's mind disappeared, dying while their minds were linked, leaving Jean alone in the darkness. And friends, before we move on to our next spot on this list, if you love what we do here at Top 10 Nerd, and if you love when I get to talk about Jean Grey, I know I do, be sure to let us know by clicking that subscribe button if you're not subscribed already. And if you are, thank you. Number 9. A God's Mind. Sure, the progenitor at this point is not your standard celestial. It was actually created by the Eternals and the Avengers, chiefly with major help from the mutant Mr. Sinister and the main Avenger Tony Stark. The progenitor was revived and reprogrammed, given new morals that were dictated by Earth's heroes in the hopes that it would help the Eternals in ending the war between Druig, who was then ruler of the Eternals, Eternal Prime if you will, and the mutants, who he had classified as deviants. However, this plan backfired when the Celestial decided to blame the inhabitants of Earth for the state of the planet, and put the entire populace basically on trial. In an attempt to save the world, Jean and a covert team infiltrated the progenitor, moving around inside it in the hopes of reaching its kill switch, so they could basically turn it off. Without Jean though, they never would have even made it very far. At the end, Jean was also crucial to the team's efforts, holding psychic damage that would have easily crushed them at bay and breaking into the Celestial's mind. No small feat considering Celestials are giant cosmic gods. And yes, I know this one was one that was still made by the people of Earth sort of, but still, the wiring's all still there, you know what I mean? Number 8. Telepathy. While this one might seem obvious to most readers in the present day, it's important to note that Jean's powerful telepathic skills were actually for many years a secret to both readers and actually to Jean herself. Initially, when we're introduced to Jean in X-Men issue number 1, it is her telekinetic abilities that are put on display. She like picks up a book and like kickflips through it. And I gotta admit, initially Jean's powers actually seem like the best of the bunch, with the most potential in terms of power levels. And yes, I know this is not how Jean's powers would be depicted, but I'm just saying in that first issue when I was introduced to Jean, I thought she was super cool. However, this feeling of her being super powerful that I had would be very short-lived, as Jean would be shown to struggle with even lifting her own weight telekinetically. In fact, at one point, I think it's even mentioned that Jean's own physical weight is her max limit for what she can lift with her mind. Apparently, what one can lift with one's own body is weirdly relevant, or used to be anyways, when it came to what a superhero could lift with their mind. Jean's like, I can't lift that much. They were like, you can't lift that much with your mind either, girl. Evidently, we didn't want to let Jean be too powerful. Otherwise, who would act as the team's damsel in distress? Which was the role Jean quickly became relegated to filling, honestly. However, later on, not only would her telekinetic powers become stronger as a result of both training and her bond to the Phoenix Force, but we'd also learned that this wasn't even Jean's major ability. No. As a psionic, Jean actually became known for being more powerful as a telepath, an ability that was hidden away from her for most of her life in an attempt to protect her from her own inexperience and her power's instability, thanks to mental blocks that were put in place by, you guessed it, Charles Xavier, who first met Jean when she was very young and her powers had just begun to manifest. Charles, of course, would eventually remove these blocks later in Jean's life when he felt that Jean was better equipped to handle these extraordinarily powerful abilities. And maybe when he was like, you know what, I should probably, the cat's out of the bag, I gotta let people know Jean's actually super OP. I think he didn't want Jean to harsh his mellow, to be honest. Number 7, empathy. One of the most overlooked powers that I think Jean and some others possess is the power of empathy. Empathy basically means that you feel what others feel. When someone says to you, I empathize, it's different than saying I sympathize, because they aren't just, imagining what you're going through and trying to understand it. They actually feel what you feel, likely having shared an experience with you or an emotional response at the very least. In comic book terms, being empathic, it doesn't usually just mean feeling what others feel. It can also mean controlling others' emotions, or using the emotions of people around you to make other people feel differently. A power that Jean has demonstrated before, like when she used her empathic skills to defeat Xavier's evil twin, Cassandra Nova. And she's actually used this ability to defeat a lot of people, I'm gonna be honest. But I don't think people think about the empathy, and it's pretty crazy, man. Number 6, finding the weakness. I mean, as a telepath, of course Jean can scan your mind and take with her any information that she finds. And this, of course, includes, you guessed it, any weaknesses that you have. Especially if you fall into the trap of thinking about said weaknesses while Jean is in your mind. If you have a nut allergy, watch out if Jean Grey's around you if you're fighting her. But even if you don't think about your weaknesses, Jean could probably easily find this out. That is exactly what she managed to do, although it wasn't quite as easy to know when she got inside his head. And you'd think telepathically he'd be pretty gifted himself, being the creator and leader of a hive mind as the Clintar and symbiote King in Black. But even Null could not resist Jean's power. Although she did have to try really hard, admittedly.
This ability was boosted up by Apocalypse twice when Caliban served him as both Death and Pestilence. The mutant Toad has been a member of the Brotherhood of Evil Mutants, and by extension a part of the mutant community for a hot minute, but in my opinion, Mortimer Toynbee hasn't really been utilized as much as he should be given his massive list of abilities. Toad has a degree of superhuman strength, specifically in his back and legs, which allows the little weirdo to jump around 25 to 37 feet, and he'll kick you so hard that you are never getting back up again. He's got flexible bone structure, superhuman stamina, durability, reflexes, and agility. Toad, like a lot of super beings, has a regenerative healing factor, but unlike a lot of mutants, he has UV vision, a super strong 30-foot prehensile tongue, acidic saliva, sticky paralytic resin out of his pores, and pheromone secretion. I can understand why he isn't exactly at the top of the mutant landscape, partially because he's kind of really gross and just overall unpleasant, but he does have a hell of a lot of abilities to offer. The X-Force member known as Shatterstar, a lot like Toad, just has a huge list of abilities that just keeps getting added to. Gavidra 7 learned the arts of battle as a warrior in arenas on Mojo World, where he developed both a sense of honor and incredible fighting skill, but those aren't his abilities. He possesses a large superhero starter pack: superhuman strength, speed, agility, stamina, durability, senses, reflexes, agility, dexterity, coordination, balance, plus a regenerative healing factor and even enhanced learning ability. Now curiously, he actually has hollow bones as well, which makes him lighter than you would think, but also further boosts up his natural physical skills. Now the cool part of Shatterstar are his Mojo-verse swords, which he can use with his mutant ability to channel powerful vibratory shockwaves, which can be absolutely devastating but also drains him of energy. But also, after his Mojo time, he can now create X-shaped portals that have to be linked to another person who acts as an anchor for said portals, if that makes any sense. These also drain him, and he has a cooldown of about like 4 days before he can do it again, because this powerhouse needs some kind of balancing of some sort. Next up is Sage. Sage is basically a super genius, with a brain more powerful than any computer in the world, granting her perfect memory and rapid analytical abilities. She can come up with the perfect plan in an instant, learn just about any skill without having to practice, remember everything she's ever experienced, perform multiple tasks at once by allocating a partition of her brain to each task, and thanks to training with Professor X, she can engage in telepathy. Her telepathic abilities allow her to detect minds and read them, project thoughts, astral projection, cast realistic mental illusions, and she even has a kind of psionic defense unique to her called her firewall. But it doesn't even stop there, as Sage even has some biokinetic abilities as well, including reading another mutant or person's genetic code and DNA, being able to literally see who someone's related to, jump-starting latent or enhancing current mutant abilities, and she has complete control over her physical body, being able to expel nanobots from her body by controlling her immune system. Almost like highly advanced antivirus. She needs more time in the spotlight, that's all I'm saying. Next up is Wolfsbane. Rain Sinclair has the mutant ability that I kinda wish I had when I was a wee little lad. She can turn herself into a wolf at will, and can even go into a transitional form that is basically as close to a werewolf without being a werewolf as you can get. In fact, she is basically a werewolf, but with none of the drawbacks of being that kind of monster. She retains all her faculties minus not being able to talk and just being a little tiny bit feral, and is not forced to change only at nighttime. Rain grows much larger than her human form when she changes, and gains access to some enhanced strength, a healing factor, and enhanced vision, which coupled with the body of a wolf grants her enhanced speed and reflexes as well. But then she got a secondary mutation, and it's a weird one. After becoming an agent of Mutation in X-Men Blue number 9, she gained the ability to somehow transform into a pack of 5 wolves, and on top of that, her general wolfy-like characteristics, like claws and teeth and all that jazz, also became stronger and sharper on top of that. Paige Guthrie is part of a family that has a lineage of mutant abilities. Sam Guthrie, Cannonball, Joshua Guthrie, Icarus, Melody Guthrie, Arrow, and Jebediah Guthrie are all part of her family. Paige's power is a wee bit unorthodox though. She has the ability to shed her skin, and by concentrating on specific chemical or elemental formulas, she can cause the layer of skin underneath to be a different element or shape or state. With that power, she's been able to have skin made of metal, diamond, granite, wood, rubber, glass, and one time she even managed to basically turn into a lizard, which should be a secondary ability all by its own. Husk has always had troubles with her powers, such as not being able to morph multiple times without intense pain. However, in Generation X, it got a little bit worse when Paige started suffering from dramatic mood swings and patchwork morphs. It was then revealed later that her secondary mutation also causes her to change personalities every time she morphs, and that can cause her to act out or even black out. And last but not least, as the daughter of Magneto, Polaris actually has pretty much exactly the same abilities as him. She can control and manipulate magnetic fields, allowing her to create force fields, fly on the Earth's magnetic field, emit magnetic concussive pulses that can overload and short circuit electrical systems, and so much more. But there was a very short period of time where she gained a power we have never seen from her father. When the villainess Zaladane stripped Lorna of her powers, leaving her completely vulnerable, the jolt of losing said powers forced Polaris' latent secondary mutation to evolve. Polaris was now able to absorb negative emotional energy to transform into a virtual powerhouse. She grew in height and gained super strength, durability, and invulnerability. Basically, Polaris can Hulk out. Now, after regaining her magnetic powers, Lorna lost her Hulk-like abilities, but it is still technically something that she could do until the Scarlet Witch caused M-Day, which got rid of the ability altogether.